Chris, it feels like just yesterday you were in my city.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a few yesterdays ago, but it was pretty close. And then, just before that, we were at Southeast Ruby. So I feel like I've been in Memphis a lot or Tennessee a lot in the last month because I also drove through on vacation too.
It's part of my master plan for you to end up in Tennessee.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
What's going on?
Oh, not a whole lot. Just busy, busy. Lots of new Hatchbox users and stuff, which has been great. But just kind of getting everybody up to speed. You know, they have to like learn the difference between. Well, it's already running on Heroku. What do I have to undo to make it work on Hatchbox? Because everything's pretty standard. Like if you build a brand new Rails app, like that's what works best on Hatchbox. So you have to kind of revert changes that you had to do for Heroku. So it's been a lot of that, chatting with people about it, and yeah, it's been good. How about you?
Man, just working. We after we got back or after I got home from our trip, I didn't do anything on Sunday and then just hit the work week. So nothing too exciting, just waiting for baby number 2 still. We're like a month and a half out. So like Shannon's at that point where she can do less and less things and I have to do more and more things.
Right. Yeah, man, that's gonna be a big. I mean, it's your second kid, so it won't be as giant of a change or as scary, right?
That's what everybody keeps saying. It's like with the first kid, your life is completely turned upside down because it's not just about y'all anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
so like we're kind of used to that adjustment already. So
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I don't have kids though, so I can't say for sure. But
I'm more like trying to figure out because right now when like our oldest, our only, like cries during the night or something like that, like it's just like flip a coin who's going to go like help him. And then now we're going to have 2 of that. So it's just like, does one person just get assigned one kid? Like what's going to happen?
that's pretty funny.
But
Yeah, and I guess we should also mention. I don't know if we talked too much, but yeah, this past weekend we went and hung out in Memphis, and we're working on a sort of a secret project that we'll announce soon. But one of the things that we're working on with it is some payments code around Rails. And we got a gem that you magically found the name Pay was not taken. I don't know how you found that, but man,
all these years later, and nobody named a gym named Pay. So
that's pretty crazy to me. So we now have that, and we're building a wrapper around Stripe and Braintree so that you can like really, really easily take care of subscriptions and setting up customers and updating their cards without really having to know anything about the APIs for Stripe and Braintree, like their Ruby code. You don't have to worry about that at all, which is fun. And you implemented those controllers this past weekend using it, and I remember you were like, "Holy crap, this is awesome!"
yeah, it was like for Secret Project X, we were like, man, this is going to like take forever. And I think it like we were sitting next to each other. I think it took like less than like 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I
It was,
think most of our like controllers and stuff are like one-liners, like user subscribe to this plan, and that was it.
yeah, it felt awesome. And then like, of course, Braintree kind of like threw a wrench in everything. But
Oh, of course. I mean, it's not like any APIs could be compatible or anything or similar. It's so funny. There's like, the Stripe changes too, since, I mean, I haven't implemented Stripe in a little while. So I'm using some of the older APIs for my apps. And, we ran into that too with the trials on plans don't automatically inherit anymore. So now we have to like take into account for that and whatever. But then, of course, yeah, Braintree doesn't have the ability to swap you between a monthly and a yearly plan, which seems, not the most user friendly for their developers who are their biggest customers. It's kind of weird.
yeah, um, but we prevail.
Yes.
So really, this is a thing though. Like Chris and I have been working on a long time because you think really like RailsConf 2016. Like I just locked myself in the room one night and essentially like copied all this code from like Laravel Cashier, which is like the similar version for Laravel, and it was pretty much like a 1-to-1, and it only worked with Stripe. And I didn't have the sweet name Pay yet, so I used a name called like Bank Teller or something.
Oh
But
yeah, I
then
remember
like
that.
I
Yeah.
never did anything with it, so like it still exists as like a gem that's like 001.
That's
Uh,
funny.
but I just when we started talking about doing this, I guess last year, I was like, I'll just leave that for like archive. I doubt anyone's using it, but yeah. So here we are. I looked at the commits before we started. It was like the last thing we did was like a year ago, and so
Oh
it's kind of
wow.
amazing that we like stepped into it. And a year later, it like still works. So,
That's crazy. Yeah, I remember it was a long time ago we were working on it, and I mean, like Laravel's cashier interface is really nice, and so that was really really good inspiration. It just gives you like user subscribe, and it goes and subscribes you, and so it's just like really readable. Which a lot of if you build this yourself with Stripe or whatever, or some of the other gems as well, it's just not near as clear to read. There's a lot of details behind the scenes too of like, we've got to look up and see if you have a Stripe account. And if you don't, we need to create one. And then we need to pass in the metadata for you and update your card and set it as the default and subscribe you. And that kind of all happens when you call user.subscribe. Like you'll assign like the credit card token and stuff like in a one liner before that. But it's like a nice interface around all that. Like you don't have to worry about those details that you normally have to, which is pretty nice. And the error handling and stuff is kind of taken care of for you, which we need to probably work on some more to make sure all those things are covered. But yeah, I really thought that was a nice way of doing things.
yeah, I also want to throw out that if anyone listens to us ramble, that we'd love help on it. So I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But like you said, we have lots of tests to do still, and
Yeah, lots.
Pay is a Rails engine under the hood, so it only unfortunately works with Rails apps, but it makes doing this stuff in Rails pretty seamless. So we
Yeah,
would love any
and
contributions.
absolutely. And like some of the benefits of the Rails engine is like we can provide you sort of the base models for charges and keeping track of that, and subscriptions and everything. Because like the way we've set it up as well is more friendly than a lot of the other options. So like on Go Rails, I actually accept Stripe for credit cards, and I didn't want to integrate with PayPal directly because it's kind of a pain. So I actually use Braintree, and PayPal owns them now. So I use Braintree just for the PayPal support. And you can do that, or will be able to do that with Pay. And one of the cool things is like you can use both, which most things don't support. Most are just Stripe or something. But I think a lot of businesses actually need PayPal support as soon as they do anything that is like if you sell anything that could be bought internationally, like you're going to need PayPal support. I know that they've got a bad reputation, but I think they've gotten a lot better over the last few years. And yeah, like skipping PayPal can cost you like a lot of revenue actually. I probably have like a quarter of revenue at least in PayPal subscriptions on Go Rails, which is quite a lot. So I think that will be an awesome little thing for people to be able to support both like out of the box.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite part about it. Like when we were working on our project and like a PayPal button just appears. Like it's great.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
The other thing that's nice about doing the Rails engine, like as you talked about, is we can handle like your subscriptions and stuff like that as like their own models, but like it's a one liner to generate all those migrations, like just like Rails pay install migrations. And
Yeah, and I guess like the best comparison or something could be like Devise. Like we can provide you controllers and models and migrations and stuff, and then if you ever need to override something, like go for it. You just kind of inherit or override our stuff from the gem in your app, and you're good to go. So you have flexibility like that. But if you don't override, you can always just get the latest and greatest from our gem by upgrading it, and so there won't be any too much complexity there, which is awesome.
agreed. So another thing we chatted about briefly, stimulus update, stimulus JS.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I mean, it's not much, but looks like they added a really nice reference section on here that explains like the concepts of how their modules work and some of the properties that are just built in that you can kind of. I mean, it's like Rails, like you don't ever see the code for the params hash, but you just have to assume that it exists in the controllers. That was always, and that's really funny. I should mention this. Like when I started Rails, I came from a Python background, so everything's like very explicit. Where you would say like, the params is imported from this file or something, and so then getting into Rails, this params thing just exists, and you're like, I don't know where this come from or where this comes from, and I don't really know what it does, and I have no idea. And there just feels like so many of those things in Rails. Like you go into your models and voila, every attribute creates, the getter, the setter, the was, and the changed methods, and all this other stuff. And you're like, where the hell does all this come from? And there's a couple of these, in Stimulus, but for the most part, it's like very straightforward for how everything works. But they mentioned the like referencing the HTML element, I believe, for the controller, where you tag sort of the wrapper of your component and then the application class itself or whatever. But yeah, it looks great. Like there's that reference thing. What else did they add? Polyfills, which will be great. I don't remember how compatible it was in the past, but it seems like they added some compatibility for older browsers and a few other things.
Yeah. I still haven't gotten to really give stimulus a go other than like when it came out. I just like kind of messed with it a little bit, but I think we actually have some stimulus now in production at Podia.
Oh, cool. Do you
Yeah,
know what like features it is?
I'm pretty sure it's with. So we just launched an editor,
Oh, cool.
and Kyle's been heading that up. And so like Kyle's been embracing actually kind of, I guess, a lot of new Rails things because that's what we're using active storage on. And then I'm pretty sure I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure he used Stimulus for kind of some of the JavaScript interactivity. So I really just need an excuse to go work on it so I can mess with all this stuff.
Yeah, I've used it for a few very little things. Like I built a little like a Tailwind component for tabs, so you can kind of apply tabs to whatever divs that you want, similar to basically replicating the Bootstrap tabs, but with Tailwind and stuff. And that's it's just been like so simple because they give you, the problem with jQuery and stuff is always like you got to search the page for whatever component is like tagged that it should be tabs, and then you have to query inside of it for all of the other ones that are flagged whatever name. And that's the thing that Stimulus does so well. Like you get to skip all of that, and you basically just say, well, when you click this, it should do that. And the other cool thing about it is like your HTML is what defines those events. So you don't have to write them in your JavaScript, which means that you can then move that stuff around without modifying your JavaScript at all. And that's fantastic. That's like the same thing that I tell everybody that asks for how do I do page specific JavaScript? My answer is always you don't do page specific JavaScript because it's bad. You just assume that if this item is on the page, you should run that JavaScript. You don't need to check what page it is. And that's how your JavaScript should work, because then later, when you inevitably want to move that component to another page, you don't have to move the JavaScript with it. And that's just a much better way to handle things.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. So this might actually be a good time for you to segue maybe into that tweet we were talking about just a few minutes ago before we started the show.
Yeah, Robbie Russell tweeted about a lot of the modern JavaScript approach of single page app, or running your front end in a completely separate repository and deployment process and all that. And he was tweeting about some concerns that he was having, like, I'm not so sure this was a good approach or not. And it's valid if I agree with him, and I feel like it's valid to separate that stuff out if you have a team that is separate. Like if you have that much stuff going on, it makes sense. But he points out in a follow-up tweet, like, small feature request to add something to the front end now requires coding to be made in 2 different apps repos, deploying multiple apps to staging environments, coordinating multiple deploys to production. And we find ourselves asking, couldn't we just have rendered this view out in Ruby on Rails? And I agree with that. Like, people don't realize that when you separate your stuff out, now you have to coordinate all this other stuff. You then have to do a lot more context switching between the JavaScript and the Rails code. And it just adds a lot of extra complexity that nobody really talks about. And I think that's, really, really important when you're making the decision if you want to do that or not. And it just doesn't come up in conversation enough, I don't think.
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned like a couple of times, like, so I've been building, this is a different context, but like I've been building an app for fun. And so like that is a Rails API backend only app. And then right now it's a Ionic app in the front end. Well, on the app side. So like, what was it? Wednesday night I was working on it, and like I got the app, I got like a screen kind of spun up in the app, and I was like, awesome. Now I have to completely like shift my context to the server side. And then I don't know, it like, it's not impossible, but it was like, man, I wish this was just all like, I wish there was this like monolith API app thing. And so yeah, I can, and that's only a small subset, right? Like my app's only like 3 screens. So
yeah, right. And I mean, that's a tough one where I guess like with TurboLink's iOS and TurboLink's Android, you could maybe do a little bit more, but at that point you also have to go take your mobile stuff and write a fair bit of Swift and Android Java code, which is a bit of a maybe bigger context switch.
So I've been thinking about that. Like I thought about that some this week, the TurboLinks iOS and Android stuff. And yeah, it is a context switch, right? Because like the way that works, if I understand it, is you have like a native app for each, and then you use this like
It's like
iOS.
It's like a web browser view that you render.
And it's like there's like some kind of like library that like ties the two together so that like your app can respond to like TurboLinks visits, things like that. And I don't know, I want to say I feel like that's less work, like, or less context switching, because really you just have to get like the shell of your app done in iOS and Android. But at the same time, TurboLinks iOS, maybe this is just my interpretation, but it feels a little bit like, here it is, and like figure out how to do it.
Yeah, the documentation is really lacking. And it also requires you to modify your Rails app quite a bit because you might be used to making a post request like normal, like submit your form like normal, and you can't do that. They require effectively, because they don't want you to ever have to re-download the CSS and JavaScript when you submit a forms. They basically like force you to make every form submit as a Ajax form, which, you don't do that normally in all your Rails apps. And we don't also have like this is one of the issues that I opened on TurboLinks a long time ago. Is like, cool, you handle all the GET requests, but like, shouldn't we have some sort of handler for errors? Like when you submit a form and it fails, like, shouldn't we also have that built into this like framework? It seems like it's kind of a required feature at some point. And so that affects your iOS apps and Android apps if you're using TurboLinks on mobile, and that can be kind of weird.
So, question on that: do you say you have to make Ajax forms? Can you use like UJS and just say remote true?
Yes, right.
Okay,
You can
I
do
guess that
that.
makes it a little easier.
Yeah, there's just no like, there's no built-in way of we have like the so TurboLinks Rails, that gem will override the redirect to, and if it knows that the visit came from a an Ajax request, that gets handled, and or a TurboLinks request, which is an Ajax request, like a type of one. And so that library overrides the Rails redirect to. And if it sees that it was an XHR request and you see that it was TurboLinks, then it will, instead of returning like a 302 or whatever redirect, it will actually render 2 lines of JavaScript, one to clear the cache because it assumes that you're probably going to need to do that, and then the redirect like is a TurboLinks visit for the page URL that you were redirecting to, which is nice. But then they provide no support on your Rails scaffold when you go to create or update. You have your if statement there, and if it's successful, you do the redirect. So TurboLinks handles that. But then you render new or edit if it failed, and so there's no way to handle that out of the box. And there's a list in that issue that I opened of like solutions that sort of work. You can render maybe an extra status like 422, and then have JavaScript catch that, and then take the body out of that, and then insert it manually into the page and trigger a TurboLinks load. And they're just like kind of hacky solutions in a sense. And I would love to see more of a robust implementation for that, or like an official thing. I feel like that should be supported officially.
Yeah, I was digging through. I can't remember if it was like issues or something somebody raised on TurboLinks iOS. Excuse me. And one of the team members at Basecamp, which like makes sense, but was like, there is no like one true way to build your app using TurboLinks iOS. And that's when I was like, there is no one true way. But then like, but how do I even get started? Was kind of like my, not my frustration, but I guess the thing that kind of turned me off just a little bit from using it. Not that it's like their problem that turned me off, but like with something like Ionic, there's just mounds of documentation. And like, of course, Ionic's thing is use our framework and then use our Pro Tools, and that's how they fund it. So that makes sense that they put that extra effort in it. But I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm hoping that, well, I don't know what this whole, new framework that DHH teased. I'm hoping that it's something around this that makes it all more fluid or something. I think it would just be easier for people because, like you said, like what most of us are looking for is just some guidance on like how can we skip over some of the like you build an iOS app for the very first time, you're going to hit a bunch of stumbling blocks and random things that like you just learn the hard way. And we look towards these frameworks and things, libraries and whatever, just for like some help on how can you give us all the warnings or like help us skip those things that are going to be a pain in the butt later on. And I feel like that is probably an important one. And there was always those issues with turbolinks of like, I think even some of the things like Devise still have, like if you log in with Devise, like and you go back to the homepage, sometimes the cache isn't cleared, or you log out and the same thing happens. There's browsers are still not like perfectly designed for the turbolinks kind of approach, but at least if you reuse URLs, you gotta clear that cache and stuff. So yeah, I think that's what most people are looking for, is that sort of like just give us some guidance on how we should approach these things, because we are mostly concerned with building the product that we need to build, not learning all the nuances of how the browser works or iOS or Android works, you know?
Yeah, and like, let me be clear, like, I'm not like, this is such a horrible thing because I don't know how to use it. Like, I just don't know how to use it. And so I don't know, like the promise of like build your Rails app and then like use a Basecamp tool where Rails came from to build your app, like that sounds so promising. So
Yeah, I think it's a valid, comment,
Another thing that kind of I was thinking about when we were talking about that tweet about, let me pull it up real quick. There's one part where he says, in parentheses, or in quotation marks, but everyone needs to learn how to use React.js, ... we keep telling ourselves. And that I read an article that Jamie retweeted this week, Jamie's CTO at Podia, and it was by Nathan Cottony. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Oh yeah,
but
right.
it was,
He's the guy that sort of he like sort of acquired High Rise from Basecamp, right? And
yeah,
then
and
I
then
don't know what happened with
Basecamp.
that. Basecamp has it back now or something.
Yeah, I saw that. Really interested in finding that out. But he is with, I guess he's the CTO at Rockstar Coders now,
Okay, I don't
and
know. I'm
he
not
wrote.
familiar with that.
I wasn't either, but he wrote an article and it was Ruby on Rails. Should I still use it? And it was talking about like, how do I paraphrase this? Essentially, like if you don't like already know a tool really well, so like, let's say I didn't know like Rails or Ruby real well, like it would be worth considering other tools like React, and he even mentions like Laravel, things like that. Like it's good to experiment, I guess, like what is popular, um, kind of.
Yeah, I
But
guess
then
like
like,
the idea being like go see what's out there and how people are approaching problems. Is that right?
right, like yeah, like you kind of have an option, like you kind of have the whole world to choose from in that sense. But then he talks about like if you like, he knows Ruby and Rails really well, so like instead of investing all his time learning in new things, like build things he's already like really skilled in. I don't know, it was a really good article and it made me think about that tweet. Like I want to learn new things because like I feel like I should, or things like that. But a lot of the times when I'm building stuff, like I know Ruby and Rails and really well. So like it is more effective most of the time, not all the time, for me to use that tool set. And it's just really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean that definitely makes sense. Of course, I think people are very afraid of like, well, what if I learned, or what if I accidentally learned something that ends up becoming COBOL and like never gets used again? I think people are irrationally concerned about that, and that's definitely, I don't know. You should be aware of things that are going on, but like if you're doing web development, there's really been no new languages server side that have emerged as the thing you need to use. Really, the front end's the one that has changed. So PHP, Python, Ruby, your scripting languages are still the exact same, and haven't really changed at all. They've gotten better over the years, but there's not been like a shift in building, websites and stuff with Go or something. It's just more low level and stuff. There's not been the you can't have the same speed of development with a lower level language like you can with these scripting languages. So that's been about the same. But yeah, the JavaScript side of things, has been moving. But I mean, there's always these times of like using what was I was using something yesterday, and they of course used heavy JavaScript to render out this table. And every time you'd click on an element in the table and you'd go back to the table, after you looked at whatever you were looking at, it would just reset back to the default because it didn't keep track of any of that stuff in the URL. And I was like, God, this is the worst experience ever. And like, there tends to be a lot of those things that would have, normally just been automatically handled for you by doing it server side. So there's a lot of, those frustrations that you kind of have to end up rebuilding from doing too much JavaScript on the front end. And then like your browser's not really capable of keeping track of that stuff like it can with normal requests. So yeah, I still feel like for the most part, like I'm most interested now over time, like getting back into learning a lot more like stimulus and just doing more stuff from scratch, even though I know that I've talked a lot about Vue, which I really enjoy. It's just also like a lot of context switching to do a lot of the same things. And most things you build don't really need to generate that much HTML, which is what React and Vue are best at.
So, real quick, I have two things. Back to your first point of like, kind of, I guess, like the fear of missing out around like, what if like Ruby and Rails, air quotes, like dies? And because I think a lot about that actually. And I guess the kind of like thought I come back to is like, I don't think somebody's just going to like snap their fingers and we're done. Like, surely that is something. I don't think Ruby and Rails will I don't think Ruby's going to die. But at the same time, like if it were to, I think you'd be able to like see that over like a course of time where like these jobs just literally dried up. And like one of the nice things about programming is like, these concepts, like it may take you a little bit extra work, but you can just apply those concepts, learn another language, and like you can find a job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I guess it's a little different from the COBOL era where it was like, look, you're writing some, processing code that just needs to maybe talk over a network and talk to a database or whatever. Like, you can use any language you want for that. But the browser stuff is like very standardized. So that's not going to change a huge amount. Like you're so open ended if you're building an app like for insurance, calculations and stuff in COBOL back in the day. That was like completely open to whatever you choose to use. But, browsers and stuff are so standardized these days. Things just don't change like they used to, or don't have, not necessarily, they're not that they're not flexible. It's just standardized.
Yeah. And the other thing, you were talking about how you like writing Vue. Like, I really enjoy writing React, but I'm very aware that like for a lot of things I do, like React can be overkill. And so like one of my favorite patterns, and you do a lot of the same, or I've noticed you do a lot of the same things with Vue, is like building server rendered HTML like Rails apps. And then to use the DHH phrase, like he talks about like sprinkling JavaScript in. I like sprinkling React in certain places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like Webpacker made that so much better. And like the cool thing is like you can choose which one you want, or you don't have to do that. Like you can use Stimulus or the stimulus turbo links. Like there's so many options. And I guess that's one of the things I kind of like about the direction of Rails recently.
Yeah, and Rails 6 getting that Webpacker default should encourage a lot more of that.
Cool. I had a couple other things to chat about. I think we've got like 10 minutes left if we're trying to stay at 45 minutes. So the last technical thing I want to talk about this week, or the last couple of days, I've been experimenting with parallel test in Rails. So I did this at my last job. We never like standardized on a way to do it. Like we just used the parallel test gem.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever used that before?
Yeah, I think so. It was on a project a while ago, but yeah.
So essentially, like you install this gem and you run these commands, and it generates a database for your project, one for every processor you have. So mine, that would be 8 processors, and then you run like rake parallel. If you're using RSpec, you say like rake parallel spec, and it divvy ups your test across all the processors, and it has a database for each one, so there's no like race conditions or anything like that. And Heroku now, it's in beta, but they have parallel testing for their CI.
Huh, that's cool.
It's really cool. So we got into the beta and we were able to like just enabling parallel testing, like not even really optimizing it yet. I could run our test suite at work across 16 nodes. And it improved our test suite by like 150% in terms of time running.
Isn't Rails 6 getting parallel testing? Is that right?
It is. It's getting it out of the box. Our build time has been kind of a point of contention. So it's like, should we wait or go ahead and do it? So
yeah.
We're going to.
Well, I mean, how much... so the question then is like, how much customization did you have to do to use the gem? And then,
none.
Great. Then you might as well do it right away, right?
Yeah, like, so I had to run the command to generate the databases. And then, so Heroku gives you like 2 environment variables, and it's like the total number of nodes and then whatever node yours is running on. And so the parallel test gem has like, it's not really well documented. You have to like dig into the wiki to find it. But if you just say like rake parallel test and push it up, it's going to run parallel test on each node. So it's going to run the full test suite on each node.
I see. Yeah.
So the one thing you have to do is say only run like, I have 8 processors, only run group 1 or group 2.
Gotcha.
And
so then it can look at the environment variable and tell I should run whatever group that tells me to run.
Yeah. And that worked like pretty well. So that's how I was able to like split it across 16 nodes. And then I was talking to my friend Josh Lewis, who like works on this project at Heroku. And he was like, well, if you think about it, each one of those processors has 2 cores. So in theory, I could split it across, 32 because 16 nodes with 2 processors. So that's what I want to work on next.
So then you would kind of need to give it like run these 2 sets instead for each one or whatever.
Right.
And then if that ever, so they give you just a 2 dual core CPU or whatever then.
Right.
Gotcha.
Well, so it's running on a Heroku like Performance M, I think.
Oh, and those have like 2 CPUs or whatever. Like,
yeah. And he was saying if you like bump it up to Performance L, I was like, I don't, we're already at massive improvement.
Yeah. Well, what's funny, I think it's so funny that Performance M is like 2.5 gigs of RAM, and then Performance L is like 14. It's like not a just double jump, It's pretty funny.
The other thing he recommended was the knapsack gem.
I kind of remember that. I've forgotten what that was. I remember seeing that.
It's essentially the same thing as parallel test, but it'll actually like so that's what I was doing right before the call. You like run your regular RSpec test, but you ask it to generate a report. And from my understanding of it, it will actually try to optimize so that all the tests like finish at the same time. Because that's one of the problems with parallel tests is it just like randomly like divvies them up. So like one could finish in a minute, the other will finish in like 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm. So it keeps metrics on them and then can, like in a video game, like, if you know the skill levels of all the players, you can kind of, assign the teams so that they're relatively equal, effectively trying to do the same thing for time and the length of tests or whatever.
Yeah.
Because, yeah,
And
I
like
guess if you have browser tests, like, and then one gets all of those, then that might take forever. And then your unit test, instance might just be really fast.
yeah, it's I'm really excited to give this a try. And this is like whoever makes Knapsack is like our hero because there's a free version and then a paid version. It's that Mike Parham model,
Yeah, man. I want to see more of that. We need more people building paid things. Like my favorite, the one of the funniest things that I ever heard was like, um, you know, New Relic was the first Ruby gem to IPO. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, we need more of that. We absolutely need more of that. So this is cool. I like seeing another paid product like this for, especially for Ruby.
Yeah, I'm excited to try this one out because it would be nice to see like all my tests like finish at the same time. But I'll be honest, it was so awesome like pushing up to Heroku and then seeing like 16 nodes running tests. Like it was like, oh, this feels so good. So
Yeah. You get your boss to give you buy you one of those 32 core or 64 core, computers to run your tests on at home.
the other the other interesting thing about Knapsack is that I'm making an assumption, but if you just Google Knapsack with a K, it's actually like a theoretical problem. So given a set of items, each with a weight and a value, determine the number of each item to include in a collection so that the total weight is less than or equal to a given limit and the total value is as large as possible.
Yeah.
It's like a really good name.
Right. That's really good. I like that.
You know I'm a sucker for a good name.
Right.
So
That's awesome. I saw you wrote down Mastodon on our topics list. What brought that one up? Because I've heard people talking about that a whole bunch again lately, but I haven't seen that one around for a long time.
okay, so this was the last thing I wanted to talk about, and our non-technical thing. Twitter is kind of a dumpster fire, but I'm addicted to it. So I don't really like. This isn't the place to go into like all the things Twitter's doing right and wrong, but Twitter's not awesome right now. And so there's a couple of people I follow. Two like most notable is Joshua Wood from Honey Badger
Mm-hmm.
and Mike Parham, Sidekick, and they were both like, "Hey, moving to Mastodon, like still using Twitter a little bit, but mostly like moving there." And I was like, "Okay, like I signed up for it, God, forever ago," and so I was like, "I'll give it a shot." And I'm not sure how I like it yet. But it's less noise right now. Like it's amazing the difference between like Twitter and that like I don't have advertisements. I don't really see what other people have like liked or favorited. I don't know. It's a nicer experience. It's slower, and there's less people on it right now. But I'm interested by it. I'm gonna give it a go.
Yeah, interesting. I know it's like decentralized or whatever. So does that mean there's like an instance that people in like the Ruby community are joining, or like are they on the main network or?
So I'm on Mastodon XYZ .xyz, but there is a Ruby one. I think it's like ruby.social.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go to ruby.social in your browser, um,
Hmm.
that's where like most of the people I guess like most of the people coming from Ruby are going. I wish I would have known about that one before I joined the other one, but like I can't figure out a way to like cross my platform over.
Yeah,
So
that seems a little odd, because it is supposed to be decentralized. So I would assume that you would be able to like register on one and then, you know, subscribe to another or something. I don't really
you
know.
can do that. Like you can, and you can like follow people across it. Uh, I created an account on the Ruby social one and now I have two and I'm like, what am I doing? So there's like, it's a little like clunky. I don't really totally understand it yet, but I'm willing to give it a shot. And I really like, I use Twitter so much. Like I've always used the browser and like the official Twitter app. Um, but it's amazing to me. Like when I use something that's not that, like, it's not Twitter's idea of how you should like view a social feed. It's amazing how much like cleaner it is. Like not in a sense of like aesthetic, but the amount of like things just going into my brain,
Mm-hmm.
and I like that. So.
Yeah, I remember when I joined Twitter way back when, I had such a clean list of people that I was following, and it was like, I remember I went and found some blog posts of like tech people you should follow because it was like that small. And, that was like a fascinating time, but it was so like I got value out of it when it was just like really small network of people. And I felt like, Hacker News and those kinds of places are when they're smaller, you get higher quality content. It feels like more real conversations, or something. So I'll have to sign up and play with it. It does, yeah. I saw on Mastodon.social in their live feed of tweets. I actually saw some pop up from Ruby.social. So I like clicked on the profile and it goes to Ruby.social. So it's kind of interesting that it's, going to jump around these domains or whatever because the instances are tied together. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with it. I'm right now doing both. I mostly only do Twitter. I sometimes check Instagram. So like I don't want a lot of social networks in my life, kind of intentionally, but I'm interested to see how it goes.
Yeah, it's fair enough. And it's interesting too, on their homepages, they show Mastodon Social has 215,000 users who have made 7,600,000 posts or status updates. And then Ruby Social looks like it's
They're
pretty
called toots.
toots. Ruby Social's only got 384 users, and looks like everybody's only posted less than twice or something, or about twice. There's 774 statuses.
Yeah, it just popped up. I want to say like this week.
Gotcha. Then that's great. Like, that many people registering is pretty fast. So I'll have to add one to that number and join.
Yeah, yeah. My friend Joshua from Honey Badger was also like doing this thing. Like if you sign up and like DM him on there, he was like, I think it's over now, but he was sending out like free Honey Badger shirts.
Oh,
I
that's
thought that was
cool.
cool.
Yeah, I need to make some more shirts for Go Rails. Send some out.
Well, Chris, I think I've used up the old social part of my body for the day.
Yeah. Well, I should get back to work anyways. It's about noon, so give some time to answer emails, fix some bugs, the usual.
We should next time tell some of our stories from last weekend about our just bizarre, chaotic weekend.
Yeah. Have you recovered from all the mosquito bites?
Until I found one in my house, and then I just wanted to set my house on fire and walk out.
Yeah, I've been itching all week because of that. So yeah, that sounds good. We should hopefully by then we'll have some more progress too. So I'm hoping to work
Yeah,
on this project a little bit this weekend.
awesome. Well, May, have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll talk to the rest of you guys next week.